I always believed that moving to the lakefront would be the perfect way to escape the stress of the city, the deadlines, the traffic, the endless noise that crept into every part of my life. For years, I had been saving for a place where I could breathe, fish in the mornings, watch the sun sink into the water at night, and live the sort of quiet existence most men only dream about. When I finally found the property, a weathered but solid cabin with a wide porch overlooking the lake, I didn't think twice. I signed the paperwork, handed over the money, and decided that this would be the beginning of my new life. Little did I know that within a few short months, I would be knee-deep in one of the pettiest and most outrageous fights I'd ever experienced, all thanks to an HOA that thought they could control me. At first, it seemed laughable. After all, what could they possibly demand from me when I had already checked the deeds and the titles carefully? But I learned that when power and pride get into the wrong hands, people can make life miserable over the smallest of things, even something as simple as a boat slip. The property itself was perfect in every way. The porch stretched almost the full length of the cabin, offering a commanding view of the lake. A set of old but sturdy wooden stairs led down to a private dock, and beyond that, the water shimmered with the kind of peace that had drawn me here in the first place. The dock wasn't fancy, just weathered planks, a few pilings, and a cleat or two, but it was mine. I'd dreamed of tying up a fishing boat, maybe a small pontoon for guests, and finally having a place where the water and I could exist without interference. For the first few weeks, that's exactly how life went. I woke up early, brewed a pot of coffee, and watched the fog roll across the lake. I spent afternoons working on small improvements, patching the dock, repainting the porch, clearing weeds from the shoreline. The neighbors were quiet, the air smelled fresh, and the only sound at night was the chorus of crickets and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. I thought I'd found heaven. But then came the envelope. It was tucked neatly into my mailbox one morning, a crisp white letter with bold black lettering across the top, Lakeside Homeowners Association. I hadn't thought much about HOAs when I moved here. The listing had mentioned one, but in my mind, HOAs were just background noise, organizations that made sure people cut their grass and didn't paint their houses neon green. I figured as long as I wasn't trying to build a skyscraper or start a pig farm, I'd never even hear from them. But this letter was different. It wasn't a friendly welcome or a guide to community events. No, this one went straight for the jugular. According to the paper, the dock that sat at the end of my stairs wasn't in compliance with HOA regulations. It stated that my boat slip needed to be registered, approved, and possibly reassigned under the association's rules. I read it twice, then 3 times, trying to make sense of it. How could something on my deeded property, something I clearly owned, be subject to their approval? The more I read, the angrier I got. They weren't just questioning whether the dock was safe, they were demanding that I give up rights to the boat slip itself, as if they had the authority to decide who could and couldn't tie up at my dock. I decided to pay them a visit. The HOA office was a small brick building near the entrance to the neighborhood, with a flagpole out front and a shiny brass plaque declaring its name. Inside, it smelled of old carpet and paper, the kind of place where bureaucracy thrived. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s, sharp-faced and sharper-tongued, who introduced herself as Karen, HOA president. I swear, her name could not have been more fitting. She looked at me like I was a child who had wandered into the wrong classroom. I handed her the letter, expecting some kind of explanation, maybe even an apology. Instead, she launched into a speech about community standards, dock uniformity, and allocation of slips. I tried to interrupt, pointing out that the dock was on my deed, clearly marked as part of my property, but she waved me off with the kind of arrogance only someone drunk on minor power can muster. The lake, she said, is a shared community resource. The association has final say over who uses which slip. She even had the audacity to suggest that if I wanted to keep my slip, I'd need to submit an application and pay a yearly fee. A fee, for my own property. I walked out of there fuming. For days, I couldn't shake the anger. I had worked too hard for this life, too long saving for a place of peace, only to be bullied by a group of busybodies who thought they owned the lake. I started digging into the paperwork, old surveys, county land records, deeds dating back decades. And that's when I found it. The discovery that would turn the entire situation on its head. The previous owner of my cabin hadn't just owned the property and the dock, he had purchased, years ago, a controlling interest in the lake's dock rights. Through a quirk of history and some clever legal maneuvering, he had come into possession of the deed to the entire shoreline infrastructure. Every dock permit, every slip assignment, every right-of-way that touched the water, it all flowed through that single deed. And when I bought the cabin, I bought it too. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. I called the county office, asked for clarification, and even paid for a lawyer to look at it. The answer came back the same every time. I didn't just own my dock, I owned every dock on the lake. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, the HOA's demands seemed laughable, like a mosquito trying to boss around a lion. They wanted my boat slip. I owned them all. Every last plank and piling that touched the water was legally mine to control. The HOA's so-called allocation system was nothing more than a fiction they had invented to make themselves feel important. I could, if I wanted, revoke every slip on the lake and leave the entire neighborhood without access. The power was intoxicating, but also dangerous. I didn't want to become like them, lording control over others for the sake of ego. But at the same time, I wasn't about to let them push me around. If they wanted a fight, I was more than ready to give them one. The next HOA meeting was where everything came to a head. By then, I had already spent days reviewing the paperwork, confirming with lawyers, and ensuring that every piece of evidence I needed was airtight. The meeting was held in the neighborhood's clubhouse, a sterile, beige building that reeked of coffee and self-importance. When I walked in, the room was already buzzing with chatter. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, clutching printouts of the agenda, whispering among themselves. At the front of the room sat Karen, flanked by a few board members who looked just as self-satisfied as she did. She banged a gavel on the table, called the meeting to order, and immediately launched into a tirade about dock violations. She didn't even bother with small talk or community updates. Instead, she went straight to me. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "your dock is not in compliance with Lakeside HOA regulations. The board has voted to reassign your boat slip to another resident who is currently on the waiting list. You may, of course, reapply for a slip if you wish, but until then, you must vacate your current position." The smugness in her tone nearly pushed me over the edge. The audacity of it all, this woman telling me, the legal owner of the dock, that I had to vacate my own property. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room turning toward me. I could feel the weight of their stares, the curiosity, the anticipation. Most of them probably thought I was about to roll over, apologize, and beg for mercy. But I wasn't built that way. "I appreciate the concern," I began, keeping my tone calm and measured, "but there seems to be a misunderstanding. You see, this isn't just about my dock. This is about every dock on this lake." That got their attention. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen narrowed her eyes, clearly annoyed that I'd interrupted her little power play. I pulled a thick folder from under my arm, filled with deeds, county records, and notarized documents. I laid them on the table in front of her with a satisfying thud. "These," I said, "are the legal records showing that when I purchased my property, I also acquired ownership of the shoreline infrastructure. That means every dock permit, every slip assignment, and every access point on this lake falls under my control. Not yours. Not the HOA's. Mine." For a moment, the room was silent. You could hear the air conditioner humming in the background. Then, like a dam breaking, voices erupted all at once. Some neighbors gasped. Others whispered urgently to each other. A few looked genuinely shocked, as though they'd just learned the foundation of their entire lake life was built on a lie. Karen, on the other hand, went pale, her jaw tightening as she tried to regain control. She slammed the gavel again, demanding silence. "That's impossible," she snapped. "The HOA has always managed the docks. We have procedures, we have rules. Procedures don't mean ownership," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the room. "For years, you've acted as if you had authority over something that was never yours to begin with. The truth is, the HOA has been operating on smoke and mirrors, convincing everyone here that they needed your approval to use what is, in fact, my property." The reaction was immediate. Some of the residents turned to look at Karen, suspicion flickering in their eyes. Others leaned forward, clearly eager to hear more. I didn't let the momentum slip away. "I'm not here to make enemies," I continued. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's enjoyment of the lake. But I will not be bullied by a group of people who think they can demand fees, dictate rules, and reassign slips that don't belong to them. This ends today." Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "So what? You're saying you own every dock? That you can just do whatever you want with them? That's absurd." I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough to make everyone strain to hear. "I don't need to say it, Karen. The county records already do." That broke her. For the first time, her confidence wavered. Her eyes darted to the folder, then to the faces of the board members beside her. One of them, a balding man with a permanent frown, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another woman on the board actually leaned over to skim through the documents, her expression tightening with every page she turned. The neighbors were practically buzzing now. Some of them looked thrilled, as if years of pent-up frustration with the HOA had finally found a release. Others looked nervous, worried about what this revelation might mean for their own access to the lake. But everyone could sense it, the power dynamic in the room had shifted. Karen tried to salvage the situation, insisting that the HOA's historic oversight gave them some kind of grandfathered authority. But the more she spoke, the more desperate she sounded. I calmly pointed out that oversight doesn't equal ownership, and that charging residents fees for something they didn't own could even qualify as fraud. That word, fraud, hung heavy in the air. A few neighbors actually gasped. Karen's face turned crimson. By the time the meeting ended, chaos had erupted. Residents were demanding answers, shouting over each other, and throwing accusations at the board. Karen tried to adjourn the session, but it was too late. The truth was out, and nothing she said could put the genie back in the bottle. That night, my phone buzzed with messages. Some neighbors thanked me for standing up to the HOA, calling me a hero. Others pleaded with me not to take away their slips, clearly terrified I might revoke their access out of spite. A few even asked if they could negotiate directly with me, bypassing the HOA altogether. It was surreal. Just days earlier, I'd been a newcomer, the outsider with the old cabin on the hill. Now, I was the man who controlled the lake. But with power came responsibility. I knew I couldn't just ignore this. If I didn't act, the HOA would continue trying to manipulate the situation, spreading lies and confusion. I had to take a stand, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been bullied by Karen and her cronies. So, I made a plan. The next morning, I drafted a letter of my own. It was simple, direct, and backed with legal citations. In it, I explained that effective immediately, all dock rights on the lake would be administered solely by me, the legal owner. There would be no more arbitrary fees, no more bogus applications, and no more waiting lists. Residents could continue to use their slips as they always had, free of charge, provided they maintained them responsibly. I had no interest in profiting off the lake, I simply wanted fairness and peace. But I made it clear that any attempts by the HOA to interfere would be met with legal action. I printed copies for every household, slid them into mailboxes, and waited. The fallout was swift. Neighbors began confronting Karen, demanding refunds for the years of dock fees they had been paying. Some threatened to sue the HOA, while others outright quit the association. The board fractured, with members resigning one by one as the pressure mounted. By the end of the week, Karen was practically alone, clinging to the remnants of her imagined authority. She even came to my cabin one evening, storming up the porch steps with fury in her eyes. "You've ruined everything," she hissed, jabbing a finger at me. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed the HOA." I just leaned against the porch rail, calm as ever. "No, Karen. You destroyed it yourself." I just pulled back the curtain. She stood there for a long moment, shaking with rage, before finally storming off into the night. Watching her retreat, I knew this battle was far from over. People like Karen don't go quietly. They regroup, they scheme, they find new ways to claw back control. And if she thought I was going to roll over, she was in for a rude awakening. Because this wasn't just about docks anymore. This was about exposing the rot at the heart of the HOA, and I was more than ready to see it through to the end. The days following Karen's collapse at the HOA meeting were deceptively quiet. On the surface, it looked like I had won. Neighbors waved at me when I passed by, some even stopped to shake my hand and thank me for liberating them from years of arbitrary dock fees and harassment. A couple brought pies. One guy left a six-pack of craft beer on my porch with a handwritten note that simply said, "About time someone stood up to her." It felt like I was finally settling into the community, not just as the outsider in the cabin on the hill, but as someone people respected. But silence is rarely peace. I could feel it in the air, like the heavy stillness before a thunderstorm. Karen was not the type to retreat gracefully. Every time I saw her walking the neighborhood with her clipboard, whispering to anyone who would listen, I knew she was plotting her next move. Sure enough, it wasn't long before she struck back. It started with letters. Dozens of them. Thick, formal envelopes stamped with the HOA logo, though most residents had already stopped taking them seriously. My copy accused me of illegally asserting ownership over the lake infrastructure and threatened immediate legal consequences. The language was heavy-handed, almost laughably so, but it was clear what Karen was trying to do: intimidate me into backing down. She even included copies of the so-called HOA bylaws, as though their neighborhood rulebook somehow outweighed county land deeds and state property laws. I ignored the first letter, then the second. But by the third, I realized Karen wasn't just bluffing, she was escalating. A neighbor named Martin stopped by one afternoon, looking pale. He had received a letter too, this one warning that using unauthorized docks could result in fines. "She's scaring people," he said, wringing his hands. "Half the neighborhood doesn't know what to believe anymore." That was her strategy. If she couldn't beat me in a fair fight, she'd drown everyone in fear and confusion until the pressure forced me to cave. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I called my lawyer again, a no-nonsense guy named Franklin who had been practicing real estate law for 3 decades. When I showed him the letters, he actually laughed. "This is desperation," he said. "She has no leg to stand on. In fact, if she keeps this up, you could sue her for harassment." That gave me an idea. If Karen wanted to play legal hardball, I'd take her up on it. The very next day, I filed an injunction against the HOA. The paperwork laid it all out: repeated harassment, fraudulent collection of dock fees, and false claims of authority. My lawyer attached every piece of evidence we had, from the county deeds to sworn statements from neighbors. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore, it was about exposing the entire HOA for what it really was. Word spread fast. Neighbors whispered about the lawsuit in grocery store aisles, on the walking paths, even while fishing on the lake. Some were ecstatic, cheering me on. Others were nervous, worried about what would happen if the HOA collapsed completely. But one thing was clear, Karen was rattled. She showed up at my cabin a week later, this time not alone. 2 men in suits trailed behind her, clearly lawyers she'd hired to intimidate me. She stood at the bottom of my porch steps, her expression a mask of smug defiance. "You think you can just waltz in here and take control?" she said, her voice sharp and theatrical. "This community has thrived under the HOA's guidance for years. You can't just erase that with one lawsuit." I leaned on the porch railing, calm and steady. "Karen, I didn't erase anything. I revealed the truth. You've been charging people for something you never owned. That's fraud. And if you keep it up, you'll be the one answering to a judge." Her lawyers stepped forward then, but Franklin, who had been waiting inside just in case, joined me on the porch. What followed was less a conversation and more a showdown. Her attorneys rattled off phrases like precedent, established governance, and community reliance. Franklin cut through each argument with brutal precision, citing case law and county statutes that left them fumbling. After 20 minutes of back and forth, they retreated, Karen fuming as she stormed away once again. But if I thought that would be the end of it, I underestimated her stubbornness. Karen shifted tactics. Instead of attacking me directly, she started whispering poison into the ears of my neighbors. Rumors spread like wildfire, that I planned to start charging outrageous fees for dock usage, that I intended to sell the rights to a private marina, even that I was plotting to restrict fishing access. None of it was true, but gossip is a powerful weapon. People I'd spoken to just days earlier with smiles and handshakes now avoided eye contact. Some stopped waving altogether. One evening, as I was locking up my shed, Martin came by again, this time visibly upset. "They're saying you're going to shut down the lake," he blurted out. "Karen's telling everyone you're going to fence off the docks and make people pay thousands. People are panicking." I sighed, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. It wasn't enough to own the docks legally. If I didn't win the battle of perception, I'd lose the community anyway. That's when I decided to go public. The next Saturday, I hosted a gathering at my cabin. I sent invitations to every household, offering free food, drinks, and a chance to hear the truth directly from me. To my surprise, nearly everyone showed up. Some came out of curiosity, others out of suspicion, but the turnout was huge. I set up tables on the lawn, grilled burgers and hot dogs, and let the smell of charcoal do half the work. When everyone had gathered, I stood on the porch and spoke from the heart. "I didn't come here to start fights," I began. "I came here for peace, just like all of you. But the truth is, the HOA has been taking advantage of you for years. You've been paying fees for something they never owned. I'm not here to take anything away from you. Quite the opposite. I'm here to give you back what was always yours, the right to enjoy this lake without fear, without harassment, and without some self-appointed committee telling you what you can and can't do." Then I held up the deed, the same folder I'd used at the HOA meeting. "This isn't rumor. This isn't opinion. This is fact. I own the docks. That means the HOA has no authority here. You can keep using your slips, free of charge. You don't owe me a penny. All I ask is that you maintain them responsibly. That's it." The reaction was electric. Some people cheered, others clapped, and a few even laughed with relief. The tension that had been building for weeks seemed to melt away in an instant. Karen, who had shown up uninvited, stood off to the side, fuming as the crowd turned against her. By the end of the night, residents were openly talking about dissolving the HOA altogether. They compared notes about the fees they'd paid, the harassment they'd endured, and the countless petty rules Karen had enforced over the years. The more they shared, the clearer it became, the HOA wasn't protecting them. It was exploiting them. I knew then that the war was almost won. But wars don't end until the enemy surrenders, and Karen wasn't the type to wave a white flag. If anything, the public embarrassment would only make her more dangerous. And I had a gut feeling her final move was still coming. If the neighborhood gathering had been the turning point for me, it was also the breaking point for Karen. The woman was humiliated, stripped of her authority in front of dozens of people who once cowered under her clipboard and gavel. Most people would have taken that as a sign to quit, lick their wounds, and move on. But not Karen. She was the kind of person who couldn't survive without control, and the thought of losing it drove her into a frenzy. I didn't know just how far she would go until the sabotage started. The first incident happened on a foggy Tuesday morning. I came down to the dock with a cup of coffee, ready to spend the day fishing, only to find the cleats ripped out of the planks. At first, I thought it was the result of wear and tear. But when I leaned closer, I could see the bolt heads had been deliberately loosened. Someone had come in the night with tools and pried them out. If I had tied my boat up the night before, it would have drifted away by morning. The second incident was more blatant. A neighbor named Carl knocked on my door in the middle of the night, frantic. His dock lights had been cut, wires slashed clean with what looked like bolt cutters. A few others reported similar problems, ropes sliced, ladders stolen, even kayaks mysteriously untying themselves. It didn't take a detective to connect the dots. Karen and her dwindling circle of loyalists were lashing out, trying to scare everyone into believing that without the HOA, the lake would descend into chaos. I called the sheriff. The deputies came, took statements, and even increased patrols around the neighborhood, but without catching someone red-handed, it was hard to prove anything. Karen, of course, denied everything with wide-eyed innocence. "It's such a shame," she'd say to anyone who would listen. "Ever since he took over the docks, things have just been falling apart." Her manipulation was shameless. But sabotage was only the beginning. A week later, I received a certified letter in the mail, this one not from Karen or the HOA, but from the county itself. It claimed there had been a dispute of ownership filed regarding the docks and that the matter would be reviewed in court. My stomach tightened as I read the notice. She'd done it. She had managed to drag the county into the fight. I immediately called Franklin, my lawyer. He sighed when he heard the news. "Classic Karen," he muttered. "When she loses locally, she escalates. Don't worry, though. We've got the documents. We've got the history. If she wants a courtroom battle, we'll give her one." The weeks leading up to the court date were some of the most stressful of my life. Karen was relentless, flooding social media with posts painting me as some sort of tyrant who had stolen the lake. She gave interviews to the local paper, spinning a story about how I was ruining a cherished community institution. At one point, she even tried to rally residents to stage a protest in front of my cabin. Only half a dozen people showed up, holding sloppy cardboard signs and chanting half-hearted slogans. I watched them from the porch with a cold beer in my hand, unimpressed. Most of the neighborhood had already seen through her lies, but the noise she created still stung. When the court day arrived, I walked into the county courthouse with Franklin at my side. Karen was already there, flanked by her 2 attorneys and a handful of loyal followers. She smirked when she saw me, as if convinced she'd already won. But I knew better. We had the law on our side. The hearing lasted hours. Karen's lawyers threw everything they had at me, claims about historical HOA management, arguments about community reliance, even accusations that my ownership deed was invalid because of clerical inconsistencies. But Franklin dismantled each point with surgical precision. He showed the chain of title stretching back decades, the county records confirming every transfer, and even old tax documents proving the docks had been privately held long before the HOA even existed. At one point, Karen herself took the stand. She tried to play the role of the righteous defender of the community, but under cross-examination, her mask slipped. When Franklin asked her to produce a single legal document showing the HOA's ownership of the docks, she couldn't. All she had were bylaws, pieces of paper written by the HOA itself, not the county or the state. The judge raised an eyebrow at that, and I knew the tide had turned. By the end of the day, the ruling was clear. The judge affirmed my ownership of the docks in no uncertain terms, dismissed the HOA's claims as baseless, and even hinted that Karen's actions bordered on malicious harassment. The gavel came down, and just like that, the fight was officially over. Or so I thought. Karen didn't take the ruling quietly. She stormed out of the courtroom red-faced, hurling insults at me as reporters scribbled notes. Within days, she was back to her antics, filing appeals, spreading rumors, and stirring up whatever trouble she could. But the difference now was that the law was firmly on my side. Every new stunt she pulled only made her look more desperate, and eventually, even her most loyal allies started to distance themselves. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood began to heal. Without the HOA breathing down their necks, people started enjoying the lake again. Kids played on paddleboards, families hosted barbecues by the water, and the oppressive weight of Karen's rules finally lifted. Some residents even approached me with an idea, to form a new community association, not an HOA with power and fees, but a cooperative group focused on maintaining the beauty of the lake. This time, it would be voluntary, transparent, and free of Karen's tyranny. I agreed to help, but only in a supporting role. I had no interest in being the next dictator. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had one last card to play. The woman was like a cornered animal, unpredictable, dangerous, and unwilling to admit defeat. And as much as I wanted to believe the nightmare was over, deep down I knew, the final chapter of this battle was still waiting to be written. I should have known Karen wouldn't fade away gracefully. People like her don't simply step aside when they lose, they cling to whatever scraps of power they can salvage, even if it means dragging everyone else down with them. After the court ruling, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer, like a weight had finally been lifted. Families were enjoying the lake again without fear of letters or fines, and for the first time since I moved in, I felt like I truly belonged. But beneath that peace, I sensed the storm clouds gathering. Karen's final act began quietly. At first, it was just whispers, neighbors muttering about strange cars driving slowly through the subdivision late at night, or documents being pulled at the county clerk's office under her name. Then came the emails. Residents started receiving anonymous messages warning that I was planning to sell the dock rights to a private developer who would build a massive marina and restrict access. The emails were filled with fake legal citations, doctored images of blueprints, and even fabricated quotes supposedly from me. Anyone with half a brain could see it was nonsense, but fear spreads faster than truth. Soon enough, Karen escalated from lies to outright sabotage. One night, I woke up to the sound of splashing and shouting down by the shoreline. Grabbing a flashlight, I ran outside to find that someone had tried to sink my small fishing boat. The hull had been drilled with holes, and if it weren't for a quick-thinking neighbor who noticed the commotion, the boat would have been at the bottom of the lake by morning. The sheriff came, took reports, but again, without catching her in the act, all they had was circumstantial evidence. That was when I realized Karen's obsession had gone from petty power games to dangerous desperation. She wasn't just fighting to save her pride anymore, she was trying to ruin me completely. If she couldn't win control of the docks, she'd poison my reputation, destroy my property, and turn the community against me. So I changed my strategy. Instead of reacting to her chaos, I decided to expose her once and for all. With Franklin's help, I gathered every piece of evidence we had, letters she'd written, financial records showing years of bogus dock fees collected by the HOA, even sworn testimonies from neighbors about the harassment they endured. We compiled it all into a single, devastating dossier. Then I called another community meeting. This time, the turnout was even bigger than before. Word had spread beyond our subdivision. Residents from neighboring lakes came too, curious about the drama. The clubhouse was packed shoulder to shoulder, people standing in the back, waiting to see what would happen. Karen showed up as well, strutting in with the last of her dwindling supporters, trying to look confident. But I could see the cracks. Her hair was frazzled, her eyes darted nervously, and her smile looked more like a grimace. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't waste time. I held up the thick dossier and began laying out the truth, piece by piece. I showed the county deeds proving my ownership. I showed receipts of residents being charged thousands over the years for dock maintenance fees that never went to actual maintenance. I played recordings of Karen threatening neighbors, her voice sharp and venomous. And then, the final blow, a signed affidavit from a former HOA treasurer who admitted Karen had personally directed him to pad the books and funnel extra charges into a slush fund. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, angry murmurs. Some neighbors looked like they'd been punched in the gut. Others looked vindicated, finally seeing in black and white what they'd always suspected. Karen turned red, then pale, then red again. She stammered something about lies and forgeries, but nobody was buying it anymore. The dam had broken, and the floodwaters of truth were washing her away. One by one, people began standing up, not against me, but against her. Martin was the first. "You've been robbing us for years, Karen. Years. And for what? So you could strut around and boss us all like children?" His voice shook with anger. Others chimed in, voices rising louder and louder, until the room was a roar of outrage. Karen tried to shout them down, banging on the table like it was her gavel again, but the sound was swallowed by the crowd. She looked around desperately, but there was no one left to defend her. Even her few remaining loyalists were shrinking back, refusing to meet her eye. She had lost them all. That was when the sheriff's deputies stepped forward. They'd been waiting in the back, silent, until Franklin signaled to them. The evidence we had gathered wasn't just damning, it was criminal. Fraud, embezzlement, harassment, destruction of property. The sheriff placed Karen under arrest right there in front of everyone. The look on her face as the cuffs clicked around her wrists was something I'll never forget, a mix of shock, rage, and disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend that her reign of terror had finally ended. The meeting dissolved into a strange mix of relief and celebration. Neighbors hugged, laughed, and for the first time, spoke openly about the fear they'd lived under for years. Some cried, realizing just how much of their lives had been stolen by her greed. And me? I stood quietly on the porch afterward, watching the sun set over the lake, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. In the weeks that followed, the HOA officially disbanded. Without Karen and her cronies, there was no will to keep it alive. The fraudulent fees were refunded where possible, and residents finally had the freedom to enjoy their homes without constant oversight. We formed a voluntary lake committee instead, nothing more than a group of neighbors who met once a month to discuss maintenance, safety, and upcoming events. No power, no fines, no fear. Just community. As for me, I finally got the life I'd dreamed of. Mornings on the dock with a cup of coffee, afternoons fishing, evenings watching the stars reflect on the still water. My cabin became a gathering place, not a battlefield. Neighbors dropped by often, and the lake felt alive again, full of laughter and joy instead of tension and control. And Karen? Last I heard, she moved out of the county entirely after serving her time. Some said she ended up in another HOA community 2 towns over, clipboard in hand, trying to start fresh. Maybe she'll never change. But that's no longer my problem. Because here, on this lake, the docks belong to me. And no one, not Karen, not an HOA, not anyone, will ever take that away again.